she sang about a heart in total eclipse. On the night of July 8th, 2026, that darkness became her own. Bonnie Tyler, the Welsh singer whose gravel-worn voice carried total eclipse of the heart, holding out for a hero, and it's a heartache across 5 decades, died in a hospital in Faro, Portugal, at the age of 75. Her family's statement was brief, almost too brief for the size of what it was announcing. Heartbroken, unexpected, a private battle now over, a request simply for space to grieve. Before we go any further, if you're the kind of person who still knows every word to that chorus, do me a favor and hit subscribe to Uncovered Cases right now, because I don't want you missing the rest of this one. Within minutes, tributes began arriving from places you wouldn't expect for a singer best known for one enormous song from 1983. A spokesperson for the British Prime Minister called her one of the country's greatest recording artists. Wales's own Secretary of State described her, simply, as the sound of an entire generation's teenage years. Her longtime representative offered something closer to a eulogy for a friend than a press statement. A one-of-a-kind personality, an unmistakable voice, a talent the world had just lost in full. Here's what I want to walk you through. The quiet, largely unseen battle she'd been fighting for months before any of us knew to worry, and underneath that, a 50-year career built from almost nothing that most people only know one song deep. By the time we get to the end, I think you'll understand why a piece of music released over 4 decades ago still has the power to stop the internet cold on a Thursday morning. Let's start with what actually happened to her. In early May of 2026, word spread that Tyler had been rushed into emergency surgery near her home in southern Portugal. The diagnosis was serious, a perforated intestine, the kind of medical crisis that leaves no room for delay. Surgeons operated immediately, and her manager, Matt Davis, released a statement that tried to strike hope without overpromising it. The procedure had gone well, and she was recovering. To help her body survive the trauma of what she'd just been through, doctors placed her into a medically induced coma. This isn't the same as slipping into unconsciousness from illness. It's a deliberate, controlled intervention. Physicians sedate the brain so the body can direct every ounce of its energy toward healing rather than toward pain, panic, or the simple act of staying conscious. It's reserved for the most fragile recoveries. Hers, evidently, qualified. For weeks afterward, updates were sparse, which is exactly what you'd expect from people trying to shield someone they love during the most frightening chapter of their lives. Behind the silence, though, things had gotten worse. Her condition deteriorated to the point where she needed a ventilator to stay stable. And during an attempt to bring her out of the coma, her heart stopped. Briefly, long enough to terrify everyone around her, and long enough to make clear how thin the margin had become. Then, in June, something shifted. Her team confirmed she'd woken up. Fans who had spent weeks anxiously refreshing headlines finally exhaled. But buried inside that relief was a caveat easy to miss if you wanted good news badly enough. She remained, in her own team's words, very unwell, still confined to intensive care. Not a comeback. Not yet. Just survival, one uncertain day at a time. Because of the hospitalization, an entire summer of scheduled performances across Europe, Malta, Germany, the UK, Austria, Hungary, Turkey, Romania, had to be postponed or scrapped altogether. The timing stung in a way few people registered at the time. 2026 marked 50 years since her breakthrough single first put her on the map, and instead of a victory lap, she was fighting simply to stay alive. On the night of July 8th, going into the early hours of July 9th, she passed. Her husband of more than 5 decades, Robert Sullivan, had reportedly remained by her side through nearly all of it, from the operating table in May to her final hours in that Portuguese hospital room. Stick around for this next part, because if all you know is the one song, you're genuinely missing most of who she was. And that's exactly the kind of thing we dig into here at Uncovered Cases. To understand why this loss landed the way it did, you have to go back much further than May. You have to go back to a house without an indoor toilet. She wasn't born Bonnie Tyler. Her birth name was Gaynor Hopkins, and she entered the world in 1951 in Skewen, a small town tucked near Neath, in South Wales. Her father mined coal for a living. Her mother raised several children in a modest council house. Public housing, no indoor plumbing. In a household anchored firmly in faith, attending chapel multiple times a week. Her earliest performances weren't in clubs or on talent shows. They happened in that chapel, singing hymns alongside a congregation long before anyone imagined a stage waiting for her. Music filled that home regardless of what the family lacked financially. Her mother sang opera around the house. Older siblings introduced her to Elvis, to Sinatra, to the Beatles. But the two artists who actually shaped what would eventually come out of her own throat were Janis Joplin and Tina Turner. Women defined by voices that refused to sound polished, voices that cut straight through pretense. And here's a detail even devoted fans often don't know. The husky, unmistakable rasp that became her signature wasn't something she was simply born with. In 1976, doctors operated on her vocal cords to remove nodules, small, callus-like growths that develop from years of strain and can quietly ruin a singer's instrument if left untreated. Surgery was meant to restore her original voice. Instead, what came back was rougher, deeper, textured in a way it hadn't been before. Rather than fight to sing clean again, she leaned into what remained, and that damaged, defiant sound became one of the most recognizable instruments in modern music. Her career ignited the following year with the album The World Starts Tonight, and its lead single, which climbed across Europe. That same era produced It's a Heartache, a song that reached number 4 on the UK charts and number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100, a staggering achievement at the time for a Welsh singer with no glossy pop machinery behind her. Then came 1983. She paired with songwriter Jim Steinman, the same architect behind Meat Loaf's operatic rock epics, and together they produced Total Eclipse of the Heart. It's difficult to overstate what happened next. The song shot to number 1 in both Britain and America, eventually selling more than 13 million copies worldwide. Steinman's theatrical, almost cinematic songwriting collided with her raw vocal power to produce something radio hadn't heard before or since, a power ballad with the scale of a rock opera. Steinman wrote her next signature hit too, Holding Out for a Hero, inseparable now from the 1984 film Footloose, and destined to soundtrack movie trailers, Olympic broadcasts, and an endless parade of karaoke nights for the next 40 years. Across her career, she earned 3 Grammy nominations and sold more than 100 million records, placing her name alongside Tom Jones and Shirley Bassey in the short list of Wales's most successful musical exports. What separates her story from the typical one big hit in the 80s narrative is simple. She never actually stopped. In 2013, decades past her commercial peak, she represented the United Kingdom at Eurovision in Malmö, finishing 19th, but reintroducing herself to an entire generation who'd only ever heard her voice sampled or covered. She kept releasing albums into her 70s, the most recent titled, with something close to prophecy, The Best Is Yet to Come. In the summer of 2025, less than a year before her death, she collaborated with DJ David Guetta and producer Hypaton on a track sampling her most famous chorus, a collaboration that climbed to number 4 on the French Airplay chart and went gold. 70-something years old, still landing chart positions, still relevant to an audience half a century younger than her. Weeks before her health collapsed entirely, in March of 2026, she debuted a brand new single live at London's Shepherd's Bush Empire. Still touring, still writing, still doing precisely what she'd built her life around for nearly 50 years. In 2023, the British monarchy appointed her a member of the Order of the British Empire, formally recognizing a contribution to music that began in a house without running water and ended in one of the nation's highest civilian honors. And honestly, if you didn't know most of that until just now, that's exactly why Uncovered Cases exists. If you want more of these, subscribing genuinely helps. Strip away the chart positions and the sales figures, and what's left is somebody people consistently describe the same way. Unpretentious, warm, quick to laugh, entirely unchanged by 5 decades of fame. Her representatives' tribute called her a one-off. A stunning voice paired with a stage presence and a sense of humor nobody else quite matched. At the center of it all was Robert Sullivan, her husband of more than 50 years, an almost impossible span in an industry that tends to devour relationships. He was there through chart-topping success, through relentless touring schedules, and finally through the terrifying uncertainty of a hospital room in a country far from home. She never abandoned where she came from, either. The accent stayed. The identity as a coal miner's daughter stayed. She remained, in every sense, a proud daughter of Wales, and Wales embraced her right back, which is exactly why the tributes from Welsh officials on the day of her death read as genuine rather than ceremonial. So why does a song from 1983 still cross 1 billion streams, decades into an era ruled by algorithms and 15-second clips instead of 6-minute power ballads? I think the honest answer comes down to authenticity, a quality no amount of production polish can manufacture. In a landscape increasingly shaped by auto-tune and digitally perfected vocals, her raspy, imperfect, unmistakably human voice stood out precisely because it sounded real. It sounded like heartbreak actually lived through, not performed on command by a producer's note. That's not something you can fake, and it's exactly why new listeners keep discovering her decades after the fact. Through film soundtracks, through wedding playlists, through internet memes, through strangers screaming a chorus at 2 a.m. in a karaoke bar who weren't even born when the song was recorded. Downing Street's own tribute put it plainly, a catalog that continues to fill dance floors and dominate karaoke booths to this very day. That's the actual mark of something timeless, not nostalgia frozen behind glass, but music still finding new rooms to live in. She leaves behind Robert, the husband who stood beside her until the end. She leaves behind a body of work woven so thoroughly into global culture that most people who love it couldn't tell you who wrote it. And she leaves behind the story of a woman who, until the very last months of her life, was still stepping onto a stage doing the thing she'd loved since she was a girl singing hymns in a Welsh chapel. She was 75, and the fight she put up this year, surgery, a coma, a heart that briefly stopped, a flicker of recovery before one final and unexpected turn, carries its own kind of power, the same raw, unpolished honesty that made her music impossible to ignore in the first place. If Total Eclipse of the Heart has ever played during one of the biggest nights of your life, if you've ever needed a hero and said so at the top of your lungs surrounded by friends who felt exactly the same way, this was her gift to you, given freely for 50 years. Rest in peace, Bonnie Tyler. 1951 to 2026. If this one meant something to you, let me know in the comments which song of hers actually got you. And subscribe to Uncovered Cases for more of these, because there'll be another one worth sitting with soon.